Okay, so you want to own an event organizing firm, plan weddings, corporate galas, festivals, and conferences, take a cut of the budget, and get paid to make other people's big days happen. Sounds like one of the lowest risk businesses on this channel, barely any equipment, no factory, no inventory. But here's the strange part. The entire US event planning industry is valued at around $75 billion, and a well-run firm can genuinely clear 15 to 25% net margins. That's a real profitable industry hiding inside what looks like a lifestyle business. And here's the part that should really give you pause. One event company sold tickets for up to $12,000 each, promising private jets, luxury villas, and gourmet meals on a private Bahamian island. Guests arrived to find disaster relief tents and slices of bread with cheese. The company had booked just $57,000 in actual revenue over an entire year, while promising a multi-million-dollar experience, defaulted on a $3 million loan weeks before the event, and its founder ended up defrauding investors out of $26 million before being sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how an event firm actually gets paid, why the gap between promised budget and real cash flow is where this business quietly falls apart, why one infamous festival became the textbook case of what happens when that gap gets covered with fraud instead of real money, and what it actually takes to build a genuinely profitable events business. The 3 sizes of this business. Event organizing comes in roughly 3 sizes, and the capital required barely resembles most other businesses on this channel. The smallest tier is a solo or small team planner, typically focused on weddings and private parties. Startup costs here are genuinely low, often under a few $1,000s for basic business registration, insurance, and initial marketing, because you're selling expertise and vendor relationships rather than physical infrastructure. Independent planners typically charge $50 to $150 an hour, or 10 to 20% of the total event budget, generating annual revenue commonly in the $50,000 to $150,000 range while managing 2 to 4 events a month. The middle tier is a full corporate event agency, handling conferences, product launches, and galas for business clients. This tier requires real working capital, commonly $50,000 or more in reserve, because you're now fronting deposits to venues, caterers, and production vendors well before your client's final payment arrives. Corporate events tend to be the most lucrative segment, commonly delivering 15 to 20% net margins, noticeably better than the 5 to 10% margins typical of large festivals, where production costs eat a much bigger share of the budget. The top tier is large-scale festival and production management, the kind of firm capable of building an entire temporary city from scratch, with stages, security, catering infrastructure, and thousands of attendees. This tier can require millions of dollars in production capital and vendor commitments made months in advance, often before a single ticket has actually been sold. Here's the detail that catches almost every new firm off guard, at every tier. Venue rentals typically carry hidden add-ons, insurance, permits, and service charges that can tack on another 20 to 40% beyond the quoted rental price. Catering alone can range from $35 a head for basic refreshments to over $200 a head for a premium plated dinner. None of these show up in a client's simple mental math of the event budget, but every one of them shows up on your invoice. Where the money actually goes and why the timing is the real risk. An event firm typically gets paid one of 3 ways: a flat fee agreed in advance, an hourly rate, or a percentage, commonly 10 to 20% of the total event budget. On paper, this looks like a clean, simple markup business. Here's the trick. Almost every cost in this industry has to be paid out well before your event ever happens, and often well before your client has paid you in full. Venues typically require deposits months in advance. Caterers, entertainers, and production crews expect deposits to lock in their calendar. Permits and insurance have to be secured ahead of time regardless of ticket sales. Meanwhile, your client, especially for a large festival relying on public ticket sales, may not generate the bulk of their own revenue until tickets actually sell, which can be mere weeks or even days before the event itself. That gap between when you have to pay vendors and when the actual cash from ticket sales or client payments arrives is where this business genuinely lives or dies. A well-capitalized firm treats that gap as a manageable cash flow timing issue with enough working capital in reserve to bridge it comfortably. A poorly capitalized firm treats that same gap as a problem to be solved with promises telling vendors they'll be paid once more money comes in, telling investors the numbers are stronger than they actually are, and hoping ticket sales or a last-minute investment closes the hole before anyone notices. This is the part that breaks people's brains the same way a rigged casino game breaks a gambler's brain. The margin on paper that 15 to 20% assumes every cost was actually paid for with real money you had in hand. The moment a firm starts covering vendor deposits with money it doesn't actually have yet, betting on future ticket sales or investment that may never arrive, the entire business stops being a margin business and starts being a bet, dressed up in the language of event planning. Why one festival became the textbook case of this exact failure. You'd think that heavy celebrity backing and a massive marketing campaign would be enough to guarantee an event actually happens as promised. Fyre Festival remains the clearest case study of what happens when it doesn't. In 2017, entrepreneur Billy McFarland and rapper Ja Rule promoted what they billed as the cultural experience of the decade, a luxury music festival on a private island in the Bahamas, marketed by supermodels including Kendall Jenner and Bella Hadid, with tickets running as high as $12,000 each. Behind the marketing, the underlying business had almost no real revenue. Prosecutors later established that Fyre Media had booked just $57,443 in actual revenue over the entire year leading up to the event, while McFarlane continued raising money from investors based on wildly exaggerated claims about the company's traction and prospects. The cash flow gap that should have been the company's central planning problem instead got papered over with fraud. Weeks before the festival, McFarlane's company defaulted on a nearly $3 million loan. A potential $20 million investment from a major venture firm fell through after due diligence uncovered problems. With real capital drying up, Fyre Media stiffed numerous vendors, construction crews, event planners, marketers on the explicit promise they'd be paid once more investment came in, investment that never actually arrived. When guests landed on the island, they found disaster relief tents instead of luxury villas and plain sandwiches instead of gourmet meals. The aftermath was severe. More than a dozen lawsuits followed. McFarlane pled guilty to wire fraud, was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, and was found to have defrauded investors out of more than $26 million. Fyre Media filed for bankruptcy. Years later, hundreds of ticket holders finally received partial settlements of around $7,200 each through bankruptcy proceedings. The lesson isn't really about celebrity endorsements or flashy marketing. Even though both played a huge role in selling tickets, nobody could actually deliver on. It's that the exact cash flow gap every event firm faces, pay vendors now, collect real revenue later, is completely survivable with real capital and honest planning, and catastrophic the moment someone tries to cover it with money that doesn't exist yet. How smaller firms actually lose this money. 3 ordinary patterns explain most event firm struggles below the Fyre Festival scale of disaster. Pattern 1. Underpricing to win a first big client, then discovering that pass-through vendor costs the 20 to 40% in hidden venue fees. The catering costs that scale with headcount leave almost no real margin once the event actually happens as planned. Pattern 2. Insufficient contingency planning. Professional event budgets typically build in a 10 to 15% contingency, specifically because unforeseen costs are close to guaranteed. A firm that quotes tight to win the bid, without that buffer, is one weather delay or vendor cancellation away from eating the loss personally. Pattern 3. Taking on an event whose scale exceeds the firm's actual working capital, essentially replicating a miniature version of the Fyre Festival cash flow trap. Without the fraud committing to vendor deposits, the firm can't actually cover if the client's payment or ticket sales come in later or lower than expected. What you actually walk away with. Scenario 1. A solo or small team planner focused on corporate events, managing 3 to 4 events a month at an average fee of $5,000 per event. That's realistically $180,000 to $240,000 in annual revenue, and at the strong 15 to 20% margins, corporate work typically commands $27,000 to $48,000 in real annual profit, modest but achievable with genuinely low startup capital. Scenario 2, a full agency handling a mix of corporate events and select festivals, with real working capital reserves and a small team. At $1 to $2 million in annual revenue and a blended margin around 15%, that's $150,000 to $300,000 in real profit. The point where this becomes a genuinely scalable business, provided the firm never lets its ambitions outrun its actual cash on hand. So if you're chasing this business, remember the real rule of this industry. The margin on paper is real and genuinely attractive. What kills event firms isn't a bad idea for an event, it's covering the gap between paying vendors today and collecting real revenue tomorrow with promises instead of cash. A lesson Fire Festival turned into the most infamous case study this industry has ever produced.